My name is Prudence Fitzgerald. I'm 30 years old, and my mother just confessed to stealing my $5 million inheritance in front of 47 witnesses. She didn't know she was confessing. She thought she was winning. For 5 years, she told me I was too irresponsible to handle my grandfather's trust fund. For 5 years, she withdrew hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund my brother's failing businesses, while I smiled and pretended not to notice. On my 30th birthday, surrounded by Boston's elite, she finally told me the truth. The money's gone. I spent it all on someone who actually deserves it. She expected that to break me. What she didn't expect was that I'd spent 1,687 days preparing for exactly those words, documenting every lie, every transaction, every email she thought she'd buried. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. This is the story of how I took everything back. The Fitzgerald family home sat on Beacon Hill like a monument to everything my mother believed she deserved. 4 stories of red brick and black shutters, built in 1847, purchased by my grandfather in 1962 for what was then considered an obscene amount of money. By the time I was born, the house had become less of a home and more of a stage, a place where my mother could perform the role she'd spent her entire adult life perfecting: the wife of a prominent surgeon, the hostess of impeccable taste, the matriarch of a family that looked flawless from the outside. My father, Dr. Richard Fitzgerald, was a cardiac surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital. He saved lives for a living. But at home, he was a ghost who happened to eat dinner with us, present in body, absent in every way that mattered. He let my mother make every decision, sign every check, choose every school and summer camp and career path. I think he believed that staying quiet was the same as keeping the peace. My brother Bradley was 3 years younger than me and had never worked a real job in his life. By 27, he'd started 3 companies: a sustainable fashion brand that sold 12 shirts, a tech startup that never built any technology, and a wellness app that crashed on launch day and never recovered. Each failure cost someone money. That someone, I would later learn, was me. I still remember Christmas dinner in 2019. I'd just been promoted to senior financial analyst at one of the Big Four accounting firms, a position I'd worked toward for 3 years, often staying at the office until midnight, surviving on coffee and the stubborn belief that hard work would eventually be recognized. I got promoted, I announced, unable to hide my smile. Senior analyst. My mother barely looked up from her wineglass. That's nice, dear, but what about your personal life? You're 25 and still single. I'm starting to worry. The table laughed. Bradley launched into a story about his new venture. And just like that, my accomplishment disappeared, absorbed into the background noise of a family that had never learned to see me. In the Fitzgerald household, success was measured by how well you fit the mold. Bradley fit. I never did, and for years I thought that was my fault. My grandfather, Edward Fitzgerald, was the only person in my family who ever made me feel seen. He was a self-made man, started as a bookkeeper, ended as the founder of a regional insurance company he sold in 1987 for what the newspapers called an undisclosed sum. That sum, I would learn, was substantial. And unlike the rest of my family, Grandpa Edward didn't believe in flash. He believed in preparation. When I was 12, he sat me down in his study and said something I never forgot. "Prudence, your mother married into this family. Your brother takes after her. But you take after me, and I'm going to make sure you're protected." I didn't understand what he meant until he died in 2015. His will was read in the offices of Morrison and Associates on a gray Tuesday in February. My mother wore black Chanel and dabbed at dry eyes. My father held her hand. Bradley looked bored. And then the lawyer read the section about me. To my granddaughter, Prudence Eleanor Fitzgerald, I bequeath a trust fund in the amount of $5 million to be held and managed until she reaches the age of 25, at which point she shall have full access and control. I remember my mother's face, a flicker of something sharp before she smoothed it into a smile. "How generous," she said. "We'll make sure it's kept safe." 4 years later, when I turned 25 in 2019, I expected the trust to transfer to me. Instead, my mother presented my father with a document. "Richard, sign this. Prudence isn't ready for that kind of responsibility. I'll manage it temporarily, just until she matures a bit more." No one asked me. I found out 3 weeks later when I called the bank and was told that my mother was now listed as the authorized trustee. When I confronted her, she patted my arm. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm keeping it safe for you. When you're more responsible, I'll transfer everything." What she didn't know was that 2 weeks after my grandfather's funeral, someone else had already reached out to me, someone my grandfather had trusted more than his own daughter-in-law. Marcus Webb was 62 years old when he called me for the first time. His voice was calm, careful, the voice of a man who had spent 4 decades navigating legal minefields without stepping on a single one. "Miss Fitzgerald," he said, "my name is Marcus Webb. I was your grandfather's independent trust advisor. He appointed me before he passed to ensure his wishes were followed. I believe we should meet." We met at a coffee shop in Cambridge, far enough from Beacon Hill that no one would recognize me. Marcus slid a manila folder across the table. Inside was a document I'd never seen before. Trust document number TF 1987-04 WO. "Your grandfather was a careful man," Marcus said. "He didn't trust easily, but he trusted you. That's why this document exists." He pointed to a section marked in yellow highlighter. Section 7.3. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood. "The trustee shall have authority to withdraw accrued interest for approved expenses. The principal amount of $5,000 shall remain untouched until the beneficiary reaches age 30 or requests full transfer, whichever occurs later." "She can only touch the interest," I said slowly, "not the principal." "Correct. The $5 million is protected, but if you confront her now, she may find ways to restructure the trust, change the terms, move the money offshore. You'd spend years in court and might never see a dollar." "So what do I do?" Marcus looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You wait, you watch, you document everything, and when you turn 30, you file a formal request with the probate court. By then, you'll have a record of every violation." I nodded slowly, feeling something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. "Thank you, Mr. Webb. Your grandfather would be proud, Miss Fitzgerald." From that day forward, I started counting 1,687 days, and every single day I watched my mother spend money she didn't know she couldn't touch, while I built the case that would eventually bring her down. The first bank statement arrived in March 2020, sent to a P.O. box I'd rented under my middle name. Marcus had arranged for duplicate records, a precaution my grandfather had written into the trust's administrative clause, one my mother apparently never bothered to read. I opened the envelope at my kitchen table with steady hands and a racing heart. Withdrawal, March 15, 2020. Amount, $45,000. Memo. Bradley Fitzgerald, seed funding. I turned the page. Withdrawal, March 22, 2020. Amount, $40,000. Memo. Family operating expenses. And another. Withdrawal, April 3, 2020. Amount, $42,000. Memo. Bradley Fitzgerald, business development. In the first year alone, my mother withdrew $127,000 from the trust's interest account. Every dollar went to one of 2 places: Bradley's failing ventures, or expenses that I suspected meant spa retreats and donations to charities that happened to host galas where she could be photographed. I created a spreadsheet. I named it Inheritance LSX and saved it on an encrypted drive. Row 1, March 15, 2020. Withdrawal, $45,000. Stated purpose: Bradley Fitzgerald, seed funding. Status: Not approved by beneficiary. Row 2, March 22nd, 2020. Withdrawal, $40,000. Stated purpose, family operating expenses. Status, not approved by beneficiary. Row 3, April 3rd, 2020. Withdrawal, $42,000. Stated purpose, Bradley Fitzgerald, Business Development. Status, not approved by beneficiary. I didn't delete anything. I just added another row every month. By the end of 2020, the spreadsheet had 47 entries. The total was $127,000, interest that should have been accruing for my future, now funding my brother's third consecutive failure. But here's what my mother didn't understand about finance. Compound interest is patient. It waits, it grows, and eventually it comes due. So would she. By September 2022, the spreadsheet had grown to 147 rows. The total withdrawn from my trust's interest, $612,000. I sat across from Marcus Webb at our usual coffee shop. Same corner booth, same bitter espresso, same view of students hurrying past the window, and watched his face grow serious. Prudence, we need to talk about timing. He placed a legal document on the table. The words Statute of Limitations appeared in bold. Massachusetts law gives you 3 years from the date you became aware of a fiduciary breach to file a claim. You first learned about your mother's actions in March 2020. That means you have until March 2023 to initiate proceedings, but I'd recommend waiting until your 30th birthday. It gives you stronger standing. March 14th, 2024, I said. That's 18 months away. Yes, but there's a complication. He pulled out another document. This one a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. My contacts at Morrison & Associates tell me your mother has been consulting with estate lawyers. She's asking questions about restructuring inherited trusts. If she succeeds in changing the trust's terms before you turn 30, I felt ice slide down my spine. I'd lose my claim. Possibly. At minimum, you'd face years of litigation with no guarantee of success. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. I stared at it, calculating. How much time do I have? Restructuring takes time. Appraisals, court approvals, paperwork. I'd estimate 6 to 8 months minimum. If you file immediately after your birthday, you should be ahead of her. I nodded slowly. Then we accelerate the documentation. I want every email, every bank record, every receipt we can find. Marcus allowed himself a rare smile. Your grandfather chose the right granddaughter. Let's hope the court agrees. That night, I pulled up my spreadsheet and added a new column, days until 30. The number read 557. The countdown had truly begun. January 2024. 2 months until my 30th birthday. I sat in the offices of Catherine Wells, Esquire, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s who specialized in trust litigation and came recommended by Marcus as the person you want when family stops being family. Spread across her desk were 5 years of evidence, 67 bank statements, 23 emails between my mother and the family accountant, the original trust document with Section 7.3 highlighted in yellow, and my spreadsheet, now printed and bound like a dissertation on betrayal. Catherine flipped through the pages with the efficient calm of a surgeon reviewing scans. This is thorough. I'm an analyst, it's what I do. Your mother withdrew $847,000 over 4.5 years, all from the interest account. The principal remains untouched because the trust terms prohibited it. She looked up. She probably assumed you'd never notice. She assumed I didn't understand finance. Catherine's lips twitched, almost a smile. That's going to be an expensive assumption. Here's the plan. You wait until your birthday, March 14th. Attend whatever event she's planning. Let her make her statements in front of witnesses. Then we file the next business day. Why wait for witnesses? Because if she admits to spending the money, especially in front of people who matter to her social standing, It removes any defense of misunderstanding or good faith. It becomes documented intent. I thought about the birthday party my mother was already planning. She'd sent invitations to 47 people, her people, business associates, charity friends, the women from her philanthropic society. She was turning my birthday into her networking event. She had no idea she was building her own courtroom. "I'll be there," I said. "Good. And Prudence? Don't warn her. Don't confront her. Don't give her any reason to think you know anything." "I've been doing that for 5 years, Ms. Wells. 2 more months is nothing." My mother was already planning my birthday party. She didn't know I was planning hers, too. March 14th, 2024, 7 o'clock p.m. The Beacon Hill house blazed with light. My mother had outdone herself. Champagne towers, a string quartet, catering from the most expensive firm in Boston. She'd invited 47 guests, and not a single one of them was my friend. These were her people, partners from my father's hospital, members of the Beacon Hill Philanthropic Society, local business owners who advertised in her charity auction programs, and Gerald Morrison, the family lawyer who'd handled my grandfather's estate and, apparently, my mother's secret consultations about restructuring trusts. I spotted him the moment I walked in. He was standing by the fireplace, speaking quietly with my mother, and something in his expression made me file away the observation for later. My father found me first. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." He handed me a glass of champagne. 30 years old, can you believe it? Some days, no. He smiled. That distant, benevolent smile he'd worn my whole life. The smile of a man who loved his family in theory, but couldn't quite bring himself to show up in practice. Bradley arrived 40 minutes late, breezing through the front door like he owned the place. My mother crossed the room to embrace him. "There he is, the guest of honor's favorite brother." I watched from the corner, champagne untouched, as the party swirled around me. My mother worked the room like a politician, touching arms, laughing at jokes, accepting compliments on the decorations, as if she'd arranged each flower herself rather than paying someone else to do it. This was her kingdom, her stage, her carefully constructed world of appearances and influence, and she had no idea that in exactly 15 minutes I was going to start taking it apart. I set down my champagne glass, I straightened my shoulders, and I walked toward my parents. Behind me, 47 witnesses continued their conversations, blissfully unaware that they were about to become the audience for a show my mother never intended to perform. I found my parents near the grand staircase, surrounded by a cluster of my father's colleagues from Mass General. My mother held court, one hand resting on my father's arm in that proprietary way she'd perfected over 30 years of marriage. "Mom? Dad." I kept my voice pleasant, measured, the dutiful daughter. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" My mother's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "Now? Sweetheart, we have guests. It won't take long, it's about the trust fund." The flicker became a freeze. Beside her, my father shifted uncomfortably. "The trust fund," I continued, as if I hadn't noticed their reactions. "I'm 30 today. According to the original document, I have full access now. I wanted to discuss the transfer process." My mother's laugh was too bright, too quick. "Prudence, this really isn't the time." "The document was very clear, Mom. Age 30 or formal request, whichever comes later. I'm making the request." Dr. Harrison from cardiology raised an eyebrow. His wife leaned in slightly, scenting gossip. My father cleared his throat. "Vivian, perhaps we should step into the study. There's nothing to discuss." My mother's voice had hardened, all pretense of warmth evaporating. "I'm still managing that fund, and I'll continue to do so until I decide otherwise." "Until you decide?" I kept my tone even. "It's my inheritance, Mom. From Grandpa Edward. To me. Your grandfather wanted what was best for you, and I know what's best." "Do you?" More guests were listening now. I could feel their attention shifting, conversations dying mid-sentence, champagne glasses hovering halfway to lips. My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. "Don't embarrass me in my own house, Prudence." "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. I just want what's mine." For a moment we stood frozen, mother and daughter, locked in a battle neither of us was willing to lose. Then my mother smiled, a cold, sharp thing that didn't reach her eyes. "Fine," she said, loud enough for the watching guests to hear. "You want the truth? Let me give you the truth." My mother turned to face the room, arms spreading in a gesture of theatrical exasperation. Her audience was rapt, 47 pairs of eyes fixed on the drama unfolding before them. "My daughter," she announced, voice carrying across the silent room, "has been asking about a trust fund her grandfather left her. A trust fund that, frankly, she was never mature enough to handle." She paused for effect, letting the words sink in. "So I managed it for her. For 5 years I kept that money safe. I made sure it was used wisely. And you know what I did with it?" I said nothing. I waited. "I spent it on her brother." My mother's chin lifted, defiant. "Every penny. Bradley needed capital for his businesses. He needed support. He's building something, contributing to this family's legacy. And Prudence?" She waved a dismissive hand in my direction. "She has her little job. She has her apartment. She doesn't need the money." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some guests nodded sympathetically. Of course, a mother would prioritize a struggling son. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. "So there you have it?" My mother's smile was triumphant. "The trust fund is gone. All 5 million of it. I spent it on your brother's future, because unlike you, he actually deserves it." She expected me to cry. She expected me to scream, or storm out, or make a scene that would confirm every story she'd told about her difficult, ungrateful daughter. Instead, I smiled. "That's interesting, Mom. Really interesting." I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. "Because I've been talking to the bank, and according to them, you only ever had access to the interest. The principal, all 5 million of it, is still there, untouched, because the trust document you apparently never bothered to read wouldn't let you touch it." The room went absolutely silent. My mother's face froze, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. My mother recovered faster than I expected. "Prudence," she laughed again, but it was brittle now, cracking at the edges. "You and your imagination. I don't know what bank you've been talking to, but—" "First Republic Trust Division. Jennifer Holloway, the branch manager, was very helpful." I kept my voice steady, conversational. "She explained the difference between interest disbursements and principal access. Fascinating, really. I'm sure you know all about it." Gerald Morrison materialized at my mother's elbow, his face pale. He leaned in, whispering something urgent. "Vivian," my father said quietly, "perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere private." "There's nothing to discuss." My mother's voice had gone shrill. "This is a misunderstanding. Prudence has always been dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic, Mom." I slid my phone back into my clutch. "I'm being accurate. There's a difference. But you're right. This isn't the place for details. Those will come later. In court." The murmurs around us grew louder. Mrs. Patterson from the Philanthropic Society was whispering to Mrs. Aldrich. Dr. Harrison had stepped back, arms folded, watching the scene unfold like it was a particularly interesting surgery. "Court?" My mother's laugh was desperate now. "You'd take your own mother to court?" "No." I kept my voice level. "I'm taking a trustee who violated her fiduciary duty to court. The fact that she's my mother is incidental." I stepped back, addressing the room with a calm I didn't entirely feel. "Thank you all for coming to my birthday party. I'm sorry for the disruption. Please enjoy the champagne." Then I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, high and tight and breaking. "Richard, do something! Richard!" But my father, for once in his life, said nothing at all. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. This isn't a negotiation, Mom, it's a notification. The door closed behind me, and the cold March air had never tasted so sweet. What I didn't tell anyone that night, not my mother, not the gossiping guests, not even my father, was exactly how long I'd been preparing for that moment. 5 years earlier, 2 weeks after my grandfather's funeral, I'd sat across from Marcus Webb in that Cambridge coffee shop, staring at a document that would change everything. Trust document number TF 1987-0412. Marcus had placed it on the table with the care of a man handling something precious. Your grandfather created this trust in 1987, he said. He updated it periodically. The last revision was 3 months before his death. He was very specific about the terms. I scanned the pages, parsing the legal language with the analytical eye I'd spent years developing. And then I reached Section 7.3. The trustee shall have authority to withdraw accrued interest for approved expenses. I looked up. Approved by whom? The beneficiary, you. That clause requires your documented consent for any interest withdrawal. But no one asked me. No one even told me about the withdrawals until you called the bank yourself. Marcus nodded. Your grandfather anticipated that your mother might try to reinterpret the trust's terms. That's why he appointed me as independent advisor, and why he included Section 7.3. I read the next line. The principal amount of $5,000, $5 million, shall remain untouched until the beneficiary reaches age 30 or requests full transfer, whichever occurs later. She can't touch the principal at all? No. The $5 million is protected. She can access interest, but only with your approval. Any withdrawal made without that approval is a breach of fiduciary duty. I sat back, mind racing. My mother had already been withdrawing funds for months, without my knowledge, without my consent. Your grandfather knew his family, Miss Fitzgerald. Marcus's voice was gentle. He loved them, but he didn't trust all of them, and he wanted you protected. He knew, I whispered. He knew this would happen. He suspected, and he made sure you'd have proof. The second piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. June 2022. I was at my desk at the accounting firm, buried in quarterly reports, when my phone buzzed with an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, I can't do this anymore. The sender was Nancy Collins, my family's accountant for the past 15 years, a woman who had been at every Christmas party, every summer barbecue, every birthday dinner, a woman who had watched me grow up, a woman who, apparently, had a conscience. Miss Fitzgerald, the email began, I apologize for reaching out this way, but I need you to see what's been happening. I've attached copies of correspondence between myself and your mother regarding the trust fund. I was instructed to keep these from you. I can't continue doing that. I opened the attachment. The first email was dated April 2020, from my mother to Nancy. Make sure Prudence doesn't see any statements. She doesn't need to know the details. The less she knows, the easier this will be for everyone. Nancy's reply. Mrs. Fitzgerald, I'm not comfortable with this. Prudence is legally the beneficiary. She has a right to. My mother's response. She has a right to what I say. She has a right to. I'm the trustee. I decide what she needs to know. Don't worry about Prudence. She doesn't understand finance. She never has. I read that line 3 times. She doesn't understand finance. I had spent 4 years at one of the world's top accounting firms, analyzing complex financial structures for Fortune 500 companies. I had passed the CPA exam on my first attempt. I could read a balance sheet faster than most people read a menu, and my mother thought I didn't understand finance. I saved the emails to my encrypted drive. Then I called Nancy Collins. Thank you, I said when she answered. You're going to be hearing from my lawyer. Nancy paused. I hope you nail her to the wall. So did I. Okay, I need to pause here for a second. If you've ever had someone in your family treat you like you're invisible, like your accomplishments don't matter, like your voice doesn't count, I want you to drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from and let me know. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have believed in you? I read every single comment. Now, back to the story. I expected my mother to panic. I expected phone calls, tears, maybe even an attempt at apology. What I didn't expect was a full-scale public relations campaign. 2 days after the birthday party, my phone started buzzing with text messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Hey Prue, your mom told me you've been having a rough time. Just checking in. Prudence, I heard about the situation. Your poor mother. She's so worried about you. Is it true you're taking your family to court? That seems really extreme. My mother had spent 48 hours calling every guest from the party, every member of her philanthropic society, every friend and acquaintance she could reach. And she had a story, a very specific, very carefully crafted story. I was having a breakdown. I was confused about family finances. I had always been jealous of Bradley and was finally acting out. My mother was the victim, a loving parent being attacked by her ungrateful child. By March 18th, 3 of my mother's friends had unfriended me on social media. By March 20th, I received a voicemail from the Beacon Hill Philanthropic Society's events coordinator, politely suggesting that perhaps I shouldn't attend their spring gala, given the family situation. I listened to the voicemail twice, then deleted it. That evening, I sent a single email to Catherine Wells, my lawyer. Proceed as planned. File on March 25th. Catherine's reply came within the hour. Understood. Every action she takes now only strengthens our case. The more people she tells, the harder it will be for her to claim this was a misunderstanding. My mother thought she was controlling the narrative. She didn't realize she was just giving me more witnesses. I added a new entry to my spreadsheet. March 16 to 20, 2024. Defendant engaged in witness intimidation and reputation management campaign. Documented via screenshots and voicemails. Let her talk. Let her spin. The truth would come out in court. My father called on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after the party. I was making dinner, pasta with red sauce, nothing complicated, when his name appeared on my phone screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Prudence. His voice was tired, heavy. Can we talk? We're talking now, Dad. I mean really talk. About everything. He paused. Sweetheart, this has gone far enough. Let me speak with your mother. We can work this out as a family. There's no need for courts and lawyers. I set down my wooden spoon. Dad, Mom took $847,000 from my trust fund. Interest that should have been accruing for my future. She used it to fund Bradley's failed businesses without asking me, without telling me, without even acknowledging I had a right to know. Your mother, she has her reasons. What reasons? Silence. Dad, she told an entire room of people that I was too irresponsible to manage my own inheritance. She called me jealous and dramatic. She spent the last 3 weeks telling everyone I'm having a mental breakdown. I kept my voice steady, though it cost me. Those aren't the actions of someone who has good reasons. Those are the actions of someone who got caught. My father sighed, that familiar, exhausted sound I'd heard my whole life. The sound of a man who wanted peace more than justice. She's your mother, Prudence. Whatever she's done, she loves you. Does she? Because love doesn't usually look like theft and character assassination. Another silence, longer this time. Let me see what I can do, he said finally. Maybe if I talk to her. You've been talking to her for 30 years, Dad. It hasn't changed anything yet. I hung up before he could respond. That night, I cried for the first time since this all began. Not for the money, but for the father who loved me, but would never, ever choose me. Bradley texted me for the first time in 8 months. The message arrived at 11:47 p.m., the night before the court summons was set to be delivered. Hey sis, can we talk? I'm really sorry about everything. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back. Talk about what, Bradley? Three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. About the money. I didn't know Mom was taking it from your trust. I swear. I thought it was just family funds, money she was allowed to spend. I called him. Bradley. My voice was calm. In the past 4 years, you received $847,000 that was withdrawn from my trust fund. You used it to start 3 businesses. All 3 failed. Did you really never wonder where that money was coming from? He sounded young suddenly, young and lost. I didn't ask, okay? Mom said she was investing in my future. I believed her. You believed what was convenient to believe. That's not fair. Fair? I almost laughed. You want to talk about fair? That money was my inheritance from Grandpa Edward, the only person in this family who ever saw me, and you burned through it without a second thought. I'll pay it back, I promise. Just don't take this to court. It'll destroy Mom. The person who needs to pay it back is the person who stole it, Bradley. That's Mom. And she's had 5 years to do the right thing. She chose not to. I hung up. I didn't hate my brother. I just finally saw him clearly, not as a villain, but as someone who benefited from my silence and never once questioned it. March 25th, 2024. 9:14 a.m. A process server knocked on the door of the Beacon Hill mansion and handed my mother an envelope. Inside was a notice of hearing from the Suffolk County Probate and Family Court, case number 2024 PR 0847, in the matter of trust, TF 1987-0412, petitioner, Prudence Eleanor Fitzgerald. Respondent, Vivian Marie Fitzgerald. Notice of hearing. The court hereby schedules a hearing to address allegations of breach of fiduciary duty in the management of the above-referenced trust. The respondent is ordered to appear on May 28, 2024, at 9:00 a.m. in courtroom 4B. My mother called me that afternoon. Her voice wasn't triumphant anymore. It wasn't even angry. It was afraid. Prudence, what have you done? The words came out in a rush. This is insane. You're going to destroy this family. Is that what you want? To humiliate your own mother? I kept my voice level. No, Mom. I just want what's legally mine. I'm your mother. We can work this out between us. You don't need to involve the courts. You had 5 years to work this out, Mom. You chose not to. You were protecting yourself. I cut her off. And now I'm protecting myself. I'll see you in court. I ended the call. 64 days until the hearing. My mother had 64 days to find a way out. But I'd been preparing for 1,787. The countdown was nearly over. May 28th, 2024. 9:00 a.m. The Suffolk County Probate and Family Court occupied a gray stone building in downtown Boston, all marble floors and echoing hallways, and the particular hush that settles over places where people's lives are about to change. Courtroom 4B was smaller than I'd imagined. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, rows of uncomfortable benches for observers. The Honorable Eleanor Marsh presided from an elevated platform, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the expression of someone who had heard every possible variation of family dysfunction and stopped being surprised years ago. I sat at the petitioner's table with Catherine Wells, my lawyer. On the table in front of us, 3 thick binders of evidence, meticulously organized and tabbed. My mother sat at the respondent's table with Gerald Morrison, who looked considerably less confident than he had at my birthday party. My father sat in the gallery behind them, face drawn and pale. Bradley was 2 rows back, staring at his phone. But they weren't alone. Scattered throughout the gallery were faces I recognized from the party, members of my mother's philanthropic society, curious and watching. Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Aldrich, Dr. Harrison and his wife. They'd come to support Vivian, I was sure. They were about to watch her fall. Also present, Marcus Webb, seated near the front, hands folded patiently on his lap. Jennifer Holloway from First Republic Trust Division, a leather briefcase at her feet. And Nancy Collins, the former accountant, who avoided my mother's gaze with pointed determination. My mother wore her Chanel suit, pearl buttons, cream silk, armor against the world. But I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her water glass. The room was silent, expectant. Judge Marsh looked up from her papers. This hearing is now in session. We are here to address case number 2024 PR 0847 in the matter of Trust TF 1987 0412. Counselors, you may proceed. Gerald Morrison rose first, buttoning his jacket with the practiced ease of a man who had argued 1,000 cases. Your Honor, thank you for hearing this matter. I want to begin by emphasizing that this is, at its heart, a family misunderstanding, one that has been blown out of proportion by a daughter who, regrettably, does not fully appreciate everything her mother has done for her. He paused, letting that framing settle. My client, Vivian Fitzgerald, has managed her daughter's trust fund for 5 years. She did so with the best intentions, protecting a young woman she believed was not yet ready for the responsibility of substantial wealth. Every decision she made was in the interest of the family as a whole. Objection, Catherine Wells said calmly. The issue is not intent. The issue is whether Mrs. Fitzgerald violated the explicit terms of the trust document. Judge Marsh nodded. Sustained. Mr. Morrison, please confine your opening to the facts of the case. Morrison's smile tightened. Of course, Your Honor. The facts are these. My client was granted trustee authority. She used that authority to distribute trust interest to family members for legitimate purposes. Miss Fitzgerald, the beneficiary, was always going to receive her inheritance when appropriate. This case is premature. Premature? Judge Marsh raised an eyebrow. The petitioner is 30 years old, the age specified in the trust for full access. What exactly was Mrs. Fitzgerald waiting for? Morrison hesitated for just a fraction of a second, and in that hesitation, I saw the first crack in my mother's defense. My client was exercising her discretion as trustee. We'll see what the evidence says about that discretion. Judge Marsh's voice was dry. Counselor Wells, you may call your first witness. Marcus Webb took the witness stand with the measured dignity of a man who had spent decades navigating legal complexities. Catherine approached with the trust document in hand. Mr. Webb, can you please identify this document? This is Trust Document TF 1987-04112, created by Edward Fitzgerald in 1987 and last amended 3 months before his death in 2015. I was appointed as the independent trust advisor. And what does that mean, independent trust advisor? It means I was charged with ensuring that the trust terms were followed, regardless of family dynamics. Mr. Fitzgerald specifically wanted someone outside the family to provide oversight. Catherine handed the document to the judge, then turned back to Marcus. Mr. Webb, please read Section 7.3 for the court. Marcus adjusted his glasses and read clearly. The trustee shall have authority to withdraw accrued interest for approved expenses. The principal amount of $5,000, $5 million, shall remain untouched until the beneficiary reaches age 30 or requests full transfer, whichever occurs later. What does approved expenses mean in this context? It means expenses that have been documented and consented to by the beneficiary. In this case, Miss Prudence Fitzgerald. The trustee cannot unilaterally decide how to spend the interest. Judge Marsh looked up. Mr. Morrison, was your client aware of this requirement for beneficiary approval? My mother leaned over, whispering frantically to Gerald. His face had gone tight. Your Honor, he said slowly, my client believed she had implicit authority. The document is explicit, not implicit. Judge Marsh's voice was sharp. Mrs. Fitzgerald, did you ever request written approval from your daughter before making withdrawals from this trust? My mother's voice was small, stripped of its usual confidence. She was my daughter. I didn't think I needed. That's a no. Judge Marsh made a note. Continue, Counselor Wells. Jennifer Holloway took the stand next, her leather briefcase now open on the evidence table. She was a professional woman in her mid-40s, precisely dressed, with the air of someone who dealt in facts and found speculation distasteful. Ms. Holloway, you are the branch manager of the First Republic Trust Division, correct? That's correct. I've held that position for 8 years. Catherine lifted a thick binder. I'm entering into evidence petitioner's Exhibit B, 67 monthly bank statements from trust account TF 1987-0412, spanning from January 2019 through March 2024. She handed the binder to Jennifer. Can you please summarize what these statements show? Jennifer flipped through the pages she clearly knew by heart. Over this period, a total of $847,000 was withdrawn from the trust's interest account. All withdrawals were authorized by the trustee, Vivian Fitzgerald. The principal balance of $5,000 remains untouched. Where did the withdrawn funds go? Based on the transfer records, the majority, approximately $720,000, was transferred to accounts belonging to Bradley Fitzgerald, the beneficiary's brother. The remainder was transferred to personal accounts belonging to Mrs. Vivian Fitzgerald. The gallery stirred. I saw Mrs. Patterson lean over to whisper something to Mrs. Aldrich, her expression no longer sympathetic. To be clear, Catherine continued, none of these funds were transferred to or used for the benefit of Prudence Fitzgerald, the trust's beneficiary? That's correct. Our records show no disbursements to Miss Fitzgerald and no documented expenses on her behalf. Judge Marsh looked at my mother. Mrs. Fitzgerald, $847,000 in withdrawals over 5 years, none of it going to your daughter, the person the trust was created to benefit. Can you explain this? My mother's voice cracked. I was investing in the family's future. You were investing in your son. The judge's tone was ice. Not the beneficiary. Continue, counselor. Nancy Collins walked to the witness stand with her shoulders straight and her jaw set. A woman who had made a decision and was determined to see it through. Ms. Collins, you were employed as the Fitzgerald family's accountant from 2009 through 2022, correct? That's correct. Catherine held up a printed document. I'm entering into evidence petitioner's Exhibit C, an email exchange between you and the respondent, dated April 2020. Can you please confirm these are authentic communications? Nancy glanced at the papers. Yes, I sent these emails. Please read the highlighted portion from Mrs. Fitzgerald's email dated April 12, 2020. Nancy's voice was steady. Don't worry about Prudence. She doesn't understand finance. She never has. Make sure she doesn't see any statements. A ripple of reaction moved through the gallery. My mother's face had gone white. Mrs. Fitzgerald explicitly instructed you to hide financial information from the trust's beneficiary? Yes. And when I expressed concerns about the legality of that instruction, she told me it wasn't my place to question her decisions. What did you do? I kept quiet for 2 years because I was afraid of losing my job. Then I couldn't do it anymore. I resigned and sent copies of our correspondence to Miss Fitzgerald. Judge Marsh's eyes were fixed on my mother. Mrs. Fitzgerald, do you have an explanation for this email? My mother's lawyer started to speak, but she cut him off. Nancy misunderstood. I was just trying to protect my daughter from stress. By hiding theft? The judge's voice could have frozen water. Counselor Morrison, I think we've heard enough for a preliminary determination. All right, we're at the turning point. Before I tell you what the judge decided, I want to hear from you. What do you think should happen to someone who steals from their own child and laughs about it? Drop your verdict in the comments, and if you're still watching, hit that subscribe button. The ending is worth it. Let's finish this together. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Not even the rustle of papers or the creak of benches. Just 40 pairs of eyes fixed on Judge Eleanor Marsh as she reviewed her notes. She took her time. A full minute passed. Then another. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds the following. She looked directly at my mother, First, Vivian Marie Fitzgerald, as trustee of trust TF 1987-0412, had a fiduciary duty to manage trust assets in the best interest of the beneficiary, Prudence Eleanor Fitzgerald. She has demonstrably failed in this duty. Second, the trustee withdrew $847,000 in accrued interest without the documented consent of the beneficiary, as explicitly required by Section 7.3 of the trust document. This constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 203E. Third, the evidence, including financial records and the trustee's own written communications, indicates this breach was deliberate, not inadvertent. My mother made a small sound, a whimper. Therefore, this court orders the following immediate relief. Judge Marsh read from her notes, each word precise. 1. Vivian Fitzgerald's authority as trustee is hereby revoked, effective immediately. 2. The principal balance of $5,000 shall be transferred to the direct control of Prudence Fitzgerald within 30 business days. 3. Vivian Fitzgerald is ordered to repay the sum of $847,000 in improperly withdrawn interest, plus statutory interest from the date of each withdrawal. Total restitution, $892,350. 4. This matter is referred to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal charges, including larceny and elder financial abuse in the context of fiduciary relationships. The judge set down her papers. Mrs. Fitzgerald, you had a sacred trust, both legally and morally. You violated it. Your daughter came to this court seeking justice, and she has received it. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down, and in that single, echoing crack of wood on wood, 30 years of my mother's carefully constructed world shattered into pieces. For a long moment, nothing moved. My mother sat frozen at the respondent's table, her Chanel suit suddenly looking less like armor and more like a costume she'd forgotten how to wear. Her face was gray, not pale gray, as if something essential had drained out of her. Gerald Morrison gathered his papers without looking at her. He muttered something about appeals and filing deadlines, but even he didn't sound like he believed it. In the gallery, the Philanthropic Society women rose in ones and twos, gathering their purses, avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Patterson walked out first, followed by Mrs. Aldrich. Neither said goodbye. My father moved toward my mother, but he stopped 2 feet away, hands hanging uselessly at his sides. For the first time in my life, I saw him at a complete loss. A man who had spent decades deferring to his wife suddenly confronted with the consequences of that deference. Bradley left before anyone else. He walked straight past our mother without a word, phone already pressed to his ear. I wondered who he was calling. Probably someone who could help him figure out what came next, now that the money had stopped flowing. I stood at the petitioner's table, Catherine at my side, and watched my mother try to rise from her chair. Her legs shook. She braced herself on the table edge. Then she looked at me. Her mouth opened. To say what? An apology? An accusation? A plea? I never found out. The words didn't come. And standing there, watching her search for something to say, I realized I wasn't waiting for her to speak anymore. I didn't need her words, not her approval, not her apology, not her excuses. I needed nothing from her at all. I picked up my briefcase and walked toward the door, leaving my mother alone with the ruins of everything she'd built. The May sun hit my face as I stepped out of the courthouse, bright and warm after the fluorescent chill of the courtroom. Catherine Wells walked beside me, heels clicking on the stone steps. Marcus Webb followed a few paces behind, moving with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose work was done. "Congratulations," Catherine said. "You did it. We did it." I glanced back at the building. All of us. Marcus caught up, hands in his pockets. "Your grandfather would have been proud, Miss Fitzgerald. You showed remarkable patience and remarkable courage." I had help. I looked at him, this man I'd barely known 5 years ago, who had become one of the few people I trusted completely. Thank you for reaching out. For everything. I was just following Edward's instructions. He allowed himself a small smile. Though I admit, watching that judge tear into Vivian was a bonus. Catherine touched my arm. The restitution process will take time, and the criminal investigation could last another year, 18 months. But the hard part is over. I nodded, breathing in the spring air, lilacs from somewhere, and freshly cut grass from the park across the street. For 5 years I had been watching, waiting, documenting. Every day had been a countdown. Every month, a new row in a spreadsheet. Every year, a step closer to this moment. And now it was done. The weight I'd carried, not just the injustice, but the pretending, the hiding, the constant performance of not knowing, slid off my shoulders like a coat I'd finally been allowed to remove. The sky was impossibly blue that day, the kind of blue that makes you believe in new beginnings. I took my first breath that truly belonged to me. The aftermath came quickly. 2 weeks after the hearing, my mother received a letter on embossed cream stationery, the kind she used to love receiving. Dear Mrs. Fitzgerald, it read, after careful consideration, the Board of Directors has accepted your resignation from the Beacon Hill Women's Philanthropic Society, effective immediately. We wish you well in your future endeavors. She hadn't resigned. They'd forced her out, politely, discreetly, in the way wealthy Bostonians handled their embarrassments. The organization she'd spent 15 years climbing, the galas she'd chaired, the committees she'd led, all of it erased with a single paragraph. The invitations stopped arriving. The phone calls dried up. The women who had laughed at her jokes and complimented her decorating suddenly found themselves too busy for lunch. By mid-June, my mother's social calendar was empty. I learned this not through any direct communication, but through the same whisper network she'd tried to use against me. Except now the whispers were about her. Did you hear about Vivian Fitzgerald? I always knew something was off about her. Taking money from her own daughter, can you imagine? She's facing criminal charges, you know. Actual criminal charges. The son was part of it too, all those failed businesses. Richard must be devastated. Such a respected surgeon. She tried once to post on Facebook, something vague about difficult times and family challenges. The comments were disabled within hours. I suspected Gerald Morrison's advice. The Beacon Hill mansion still stood, of course, still beautiful, still imposing, but now when neighbors passed, they walked a little faster. The landmark had become a monument to something else entirely. My mother spent 30 years building her reputation in Boston society. It took 30 days for it to collapse. August 2024. The court order for restitution arrived at the Beacon Hill mansion like a bill from the universe. Total amount due, $892,350. My mother didn't have it. The checking accounts, the investment portfolios she'd bragged about at dinner parties, they held perhaps $200,000, much of it jointly owned with my father. The rest had been spent on Bradley's ventures, on charity galas, on the lifestyle she'd convinced herself she was entitled to, which left only one option: selling assets. The Cape Cod house went first, a 6-bedroom waterfront property my grandparents had purchased in 1975. It sold in September for $1.2 million, enough to cover the restitution with some left over for legal fees. I wasn't there for the closing. But Marcus told me about it. How my mother had stood on the lawn afterward, watching strangers tour the rooms where she'd spent every summer of her married life. She cried, Marcus said, his voice neutral. For the first time since the hearing, she cried. I waited for the satisfaction to come, the vindication, the joy of watching her lose something she loved. It didn't come. I didn't feel glad, but I didn't feel guilty either. That money was never hers to spend. The house was sold to repay what she stole. The math was simple, even if the emotions weren't. As for Bradley, the court couldn't force him to contribute. He had nothing. The startups had consumed everything he'd ever received, leaving behind only debt and a LinkedIn profile that still listed him as a serial entrepreneur. Our mother's scheme had funded his dreams. Now both of them had to face what was left when the money stopped. The criminal investigation continued, grinding slowly through the system. Prosecutors mentioned a timeline of 12 to 18 months before potential charges. My mother was still free, but she was no longer untouchable. My father called me 3 weeks after the Cape Cod house sold. Prudence. His voice was different now, smaller somehow. Less like the distant patriarch I'd grown up with, and more like an old man who had finally seen too much. Can I take you to dinner? Just the two of us, please. We met at a restaurant in Cambridge, neutral territory. He looked older than I remembered, the lines in his face deeper, the silver at his temples spreading. "I'm sorry," he said before the appetizers arrived. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I let your mother. I'm sorry for all of it." I studied him across the table, this man I'd loved my whole life, who had loved me too, in his limited way. "Thank you for saying that, Dad. I should have said it years ago. I should have done a lot of things differently." He looked down at his water glass. "Your mother, she wasn't always like this. Or maybe she was, and I didn't want to see it. Either way, I failed you." "You did?" He flinched, but didn't argue. "I need time," I said, "to figure out what kind of relationship we can have, if we can have one." "I understand." I meant it as a boundary, not a rejection. But I wasn't sure he could tell the difference. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he'd spent so many years avoiding conflict that he'd never learned how to sit inside discomfort. Bradley texted me a month later. "I'm really sorry, Prue. I didn't know. I should have asked. I don't know what to say." I read it. I didn't reply, not right away. Maybe someday. But not today. Some apologies take time to accept. And some relationships require distance before they can be rebuilt, if they can be rebuilt at all. October 2024. 5 months after the hearing, my life had changed in ways I was still learning to recognize. At work, I'd been promoted to manager, the youngest in my department. My supervising partner had pulled me aside after the announcement. "Prudence, we've always known you were exceptional, but watching you handle this situation with your family, that takes a different kind of strength. We need people like you in leadership." I didn't tell her that the situation had taught me more about financial manipulation than any audit ever could, or that 5 years of tracking my mother's transactions had made me very, very good at spotting irregularities. Some lessons come from textbooks, others come from betrayal. The $5 million principal was now under my direct control, managed by a fiduciary advisor I'd selected myself, a woman named Dr. Sarah Hammond, who came with sterling references and no connection whatsoever to anyone named Fitzgerald. I bought an apartment in Back Bay. It wasn't large, 1 bedroom, a small study, a galley kitchen with a window overlooking the street. But every square foot of it was mine, purchased with my own salary, furnished with my own taste. On my bookshelf, I kept a single photograph, my grandfather Edward, taken at his retirement party in 1987, the year he'd created my trust. He was smiling in the picture, a real smile, not the kind people wear for cameras, the smile of a man who had built something worth building and knew it would last. "You did it, Grandpa," I said to the photograph sometimes, when the apartment was quiet and the city lights flickered outside my window. "You protected me." I was finally living on my own terms, in a space no one could take from me, building a future I had earned. For the first time, I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. People ask me sometimes how I managed to stay silent for 5 years, how I sat at family dinners, listening to my mother dismiss my career, how I watched Bradley receive check after check for ventures that were doomed from the start, how I smiled through birthday parties and holiday gatherings while counting the days until I could act. The truth is, I almost didn't. There were nights when the anger was so sharp I could taste it, metallic, bitter, burning in my throat. Nights when I drafted emails I never sent, practiced confrontations that never happened. Imagined standing up at Thanksgiving dinner and screaming every truth I'd been swallowing for years. But I didn't, because I understood something my mother never learned. Patience isn't about accepting mistreatment. It's about refusing to fight on someone else's terms. If I had confronted her in 2019, she would have restructured the trust, moved the money, hired lawyers to delay and obfuscate until I was too exhausted to continue. She would have controlled the narrative, painted me as the ungrateful daughter, turned family against me before I had any proof. Instead, I waited. I watched. I documented. And when I finally acted, I did it with enough evidence to make her own words condemn her. My mother thought silence was weakness. She thought my quiet meant I was scared, or naive, or too stupid to understand what she was doing. She was wrong. My silence was strategy. My patience was power. And in the end, the only voice that mattered was the judge's. December 2024. A Christmas card arrived at my Back Bay apartment. A tasteful scene of snow-covered pines, my father's handwriting on the envelope. Inside, just a few words. Merry Christmas, Prudence. I hope you're well. I love you. Dad. No signature from my mother. I sat with the card for a long time, turning it over in my hands, feeling its weight. Then I wrote a response. Dear Dad, Merry Christmas. I'm doing well. Better than I've been in years. I hope you're finding peace in this season. I'm not ready for holiday dinners or family gatherings. I don't know if I ever will be, but I can manage this. A card, once in a while. A reminder that we still exist to each other. That's what I can offer right now. Love, Prudence. I mailed it the next morning. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful phone calls or heartfelt apologies that fixed everything. Real life doesn't work that way, not after what happened. But there was this, a boundary, clearly drawn. A door left slightly ajar, not slammed shut. I hadn't cut off my family. I had just stopped pretending we were closer than we were. I stopped performing the role of the good daughter, the understanding sister, the person who absorbed everyone else's needs while ignoring her own. Love, I was learning, doesn't mean unlimited access. It doesn't mean forgiveness without change or tolerance without limits. Love means knowing what you can give and being honest about what you can't. Spring 2025. I sat in my apartment as the evening light turned gold through the window, watching the city come alive below. On my desk, a folder with the preliminary paperwork for the Edward Fitzgerald Memorial Scholarship Fund. The plan was still taking shape, a fund for first-generation college students pursuing degrees in finance and accounting. Young people who, like my grandfather, came from nothing and wanted to build something. Young people who deserved someone in their corner. It felt right. It felt like continuation. On my bookshelf, my grandfather smiled at me from his photograph. I had never known him as well as I wished I had, but in the years since his death, I'd come to understand him better than I ever did when he was alive. He hadn't just left me money. He'd left me protection. He'd looked at his family with clear eyes and done what he could to shield me from them. Now it was my turn to do something worthy of that gift. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't watching through a window while other people lived my life. I was finally, simply, myself. The trust fund was never about the money. It was about being seen, being believed, being valued. And now I could give myself those things, without waiting for anyone's permission. That's my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to prove your worth to people who should have believed in you from the start, I want you to know, you're not alone. Subscribe if you haven't already, and check the description for more stories like this one. Drop a comment telling me your experience. And remember, your silence might feel like weakness right now, but it could be building something they can't see yet. Thank you for listening.